Certainly when we think about the relevance of the upfronts today, right? And to your point, right, we've kind of heard this long narrative over the years that the upfronts are going to die or they're going to be dead, and that never really seems to happen. So when we think about what role they play in our business, really, I think the upfronts have evolved kind of quietly in a way that we haven't really talked about, right? So traditionally, it was always about how do we lock in the right amount of inventory at the right price, and that was kind of it, right? That was the base of the upfront negotiation. Um, and that piece still exists, right? That's still a critical role, right? But with a lot of the innovation that spilled into the space, all of a sudden upfront conversations are spinning off on different tangents and different axes, right? And it's no longer just about price and volume. It's about partnership and innovation and what can we do together. And we have this data asset and you have that data asset. And how can we think about this in a broader context of our businesses together? And in that way, it's really evolved past kind of a pure buy, sell, transactional time of year into one where we get to sit down with our buyers and have honest conversations about our businesses together and kind of plan for where we want those to go. It's becoming a lot more strategic.
From what you're saying, the idea of performance has maybe evolved as well in terms of the upfronts, which performance has always been a key part of why advertisers buy during this marketplace season. How has performance evolved, and how has premium been redefined, and
Yeah.
how has Paramount's premium redefined initiative taken in all that?
So when we think about advertising performance and how advertisers and agencies and just buyers of media really view kind of the things that are important to them, especially this time of the year, right? That has certainly been evolving. And I think a lot of the evolution there has been driven by advancements in measurement, and right? And the ability to now get a better understanding for how media is actually moving products off the shelf as opposed to delivering against kind of historic media metrics, right? So this notion that you can tell your advertisers this is how many units you've sold because you did this thing, right? That's the actual question they care about, right? They care about their business, how much product they're selling. They care less about things like GRPs, right? That doesn't matter. It was always a proxy for what they could sell. So as we've able to get closer and closer and close that loop, I think what it's allowed advertisers and buyers to really do is re-examine their media buys through a different lens and start to think about efficiency and efficacy is kind of discrete concepts is purely, historically maybe they were just purely one. Um, this is also what I think is driving a lot of the evolution of the upfront and making it more strategic is all of a sudden people aren't just talking about, well, how do I get more ads for the same dollar? It's, well, how can I make those ads work better, right? How can I make sure that my advertising is pointed in the right people in the right place at the right time to move units on the shelf, and also that we can measure that on the back end to make sure it's working. And that's really what the premium redefined story from Paramount's about, right? Is this notion that, hey, consumers are fundamentally changing the way they buy products. They're fundamentally changing the way they consume media and the way that advertising works upon them and through their consumer journey is evolving. We need to be able to kind of ride that wave, right? We need to be able to measure it and to react to it and to provide our advertisers with solutions that drive results for their end businesses as opposed to just, a stock KPI report that we kind of historically have done this. And as that happens, then you start to think about, well, what media is working better? How does it move? How do these things work in concert? And that's the new definition of premium, right? It's what can I do with the media that I have and how can I tell my story in the right way and in the right channels to ultimately move consumer behavior.
So moving consumer behavior is dependent on the other big term that we're constantly hearing now, the idea that we're in the attention economy, and engagement is, synonymous with premium. So is engagement at the core of that idea, whether it's premium redefined or other tools that Paramount is focusing on?
So I almost think about engagement, attention, a lot of these metrics that, especially like 2 years ago, they were a huge hot topic of conversation. Again, those are middle metrics, right? It's trying to help understand why the media is having the effect that it is. Where I think the industry is focusing now is understanding how can we best measure that effect, right? Uh, Understanding why media drives results, incredibly important. Attention, engagement, all of those things help understand why the media works. But for the first time, I think we're really hyper focused on the notion of like, well, we can actually know if it's working, and that's where we should be investing, right? Maybe in the past, those data sets weren't available, those methods weren't available. So we had to sort of sit in these middle proxy metric spaces as an explanation or a projection for how effective a media buy was. Now those things are becoming an explanation for effectiveness as opposed to a determination of effectiveness. And I think that's really what's been kind of exciting, especially as consumers change. And frankly, the notion of engagement and attention changes, right? Like the ability to hold multiple devices at the same time has fundamentally changed what that even means. So by capturing kind of the end state, by understanding what media is working, how it's moving consumer behavior, we can then contextualize all of this other information as consumers evolve.
So now that you have that understanding, how has that changed Paramount's approach to its content strategy? Again, with that idea of this is about enhancing that viewer engagement.
So Paramount, I think this year, from a content strategy perspective, we're really focusing right on quality. And I think that that's what we do best. And that's where we see consumers engaging, right? We have 8 of the top 10 shows on broadcast television. We have 3 of the top 10 shows on streaming. Landman was the #1 show on streaming, right? These are things where we look at these large, hyper premium pieces of content. They engage consumers. They bring them into that world. They bring them into that narrative. And that's what people are responding really well to. So moving forward, I think that's where we're going to be doubling down, right? Where we've seen our most success and types of content like that, that give consumers those immersive worlds, those immersive environments that draw folks emotionally along these long narrative journeys, and less on kind of a bulk of stuff, right? We want to make sure that when we are investing in content, it's something that we know when consumers engage with it on the platform, they're going to see it, they're going to identify with it, they're going to enjoy it, and then they're going to watch the next piece. As opposed to just like, what's the maximum library we can produce?
So there's the power of scripted narrative formats that engage people. Then live sports is a whole other kind of engagement. And the last few years have really seen streaming evolve from this place where binging is everything to now live sports has really come into the fore. And there's greater balance between linear and streaming when it comes to live sports. How has Paramount approached that? How do you view that balance?
So somebody one time said that sports is the greatest expression of reality television there is, and I think that's true, right? And sports has really come to the forefront because it's a live moment where people come together in mass and have a collective experience and a collective emotional experience. Similar to why we're doubling down on our big scripted narratives and dramas, right? When people come together for appointment television on a Sunday to find out who dies this week on Mobland, right? And then they enjoy that together and they experience it together and they have that sort of joint emotional moment and they can talk about that the next day, right? That's an incredibly important atmosphere. And when we look at traditional linear television, sports has always played that role, but it's now doing that in spades, right? Like live TV is, and this is the reason there's so much fascination with live TV, live events. That concurrent reach, that concurrent emotional touch point is so important. That's why I'm lucky to work at Paramount, right? It's that we have such a long and stacked roster of these different types of content, right? Whether it's long form Taylor Sheridan narratives, live sports, entertainment, right? Reality television, shows that on broadcast television are moving 10 plus million viewers a night, right? Things like Tracker, Matlock. They all serve these interesting purposes of joining consumers in this emotional connection point. And that's where you can be most effective with delivering brand messaging.